Session 3 of God is Merciful. Jonah, chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, verse by verse study. Chapter 2 begins. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the fish's belly. And he said, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your billows and your waves passed over me. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight. Yet I will look again toward your holy temple. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Keeping with the theme of a pilot, consider how you would respond if your deviation from the flight plan set you on course to crash land on a deserted island. Think about what emotions might be present as you were going down. Would you try to reach out to the airport command tower for help or rescue? Remember, it's you that got you in this setup. Lesson 3 of our study of Jonah is all about Jonah's response to seeing the predicament his own actions have made for him. The mariners encountered God in such a way through Jonah's disobedience that they ended up repenting and making vows before Jonah's God. Their story serves as a great reminder to all who have ever served any other gods that you will not find a God like our God. You will not find a God like this. This God of Jonah is the real deal. And while they are worshiping, Jonah, who's now been tossed overboard, is in the belly of a great fish. And thanks to how chapter 1 ends, we know that Jonah was in there for 3 days and 3 nights. And I love that God shared this little bit of information because it gives hope to all who have disobeyed that even in our disobedience, God will send rescue for us and he will show us mercy. The question then is, are you able to put your pride aside and call out for help? All right, so let's jump in verse by verse and let's see Jonah's next move. Verse 1. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the fish's belly. Prayer. Sometimes we get so lost in circumstances that we forget to pray. Or maybe it's that we don't forget to pray. We just don't want to pray. But prayer is the very action we need to take in times of distress. Many have been taught that prayer is simply a conversation with God. That's an easy assumption when you haven't had the opportunity to talk to God like a close friend, or when you haven't had to approach his throne in dire need. This verse shows us that prayer has a formal purpose. The verb used here for prayer can mean to intervene, to interpose, and of course, pray. This word is significant because it points to 2 opposing sides, as in the case of one being before the court of law. They're petitioning their case. They're wanting to be heard by the one in the judgment seat. And let me tell you, you don't come before the judge as in simple conversation. So why would you do the same with God? Be careful not to dilute the legal ability God has given us to petition his courts because of our established space of communing with God. communing with God, that normal day-to-day conversation that we may have with God, engaging him and seeking him and talking with him about all things, that space is needed. Both of these spaces are needed. Both are powerful. But in this situation, Jonah was guilty as charged and needed to plead his case before heaven. He didn't need to converse with God like his best friend. No, he needed to cry out before the Lord. He wanted God to hear his heart and spare his life. He wanted God's mercy. And another interesting piece of information here is where Jonah was when he prayed. He prayed from the belly of the fish. What's so interesting is that same word used for prayer here is also used in another time within the Bible as a thought. Could it be that Jonah wasn't able to audibly petition heaven with his mouth, so he petitioned heaven in his thoughts? There's so much more to be said on this topic, but I'll end with this. Don't let the silencing of your mouth cause you to think that God can't hear you from where he sits. Don't let the silencing of your mouth cause you to think you can't be heard on high. God hears you. He hears your innermost thoughts. Verse 2. And he said, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. Boy, I bet Jonah was glad when the Lord heard his voice from deep within. Sometimes it takes our situation to make us humbly seek God. Jonah was certain that he was in his final resting place, but God heard him to his surprise. Have you ever been surprised God heard you? Like, Lord, I know I screwed up. Still, you hear me? You want to hear from me? Still? Me? The one that's disobedient? Me? The one that has gone against what you told me to? Me? You heard from me? I'm in the lowest place I can go. And you listened and you heard my cry. You listened to me. Man, think about that. Verse 3. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your billows and your waves passed over me. Now, this verse here, let's go back for a second. Jonah says, for you cast me into the deep. Wait a minute, Jonah. Are you blaming God for your predicament? Now, remember, this was Jonah's plan. He asked to be thrown over the boat as a solution to stopping the storm. Yet now he says it was God who threw him out into the deep. This brings up a point. We often hear being deep as though it is a desired place. But a lot of times when we see this word here transliterated as deep in the Bible, it points to the depth of something or a state of deep grief. It is symbolic of one's position or condition, depression, depth of the ocean, darkness without light. As for Jonah, he was as deep as he can go. And he wasn't deep in the word of God or in knowledge of God. He was deep in the whale's, well, the fish's belly. Like I said, we don't know for certain it was a whale, but I was taught as a child it was whale, and I'm sure you were too. That's a whole other conversation for other discussion. Like, who said that it was a whale? Why do we all assume it was a whale? Kind of like the fruit, the forbidden fruit, and we all think it was an apple, but I digress. So going back here to verse 3, Jonah felt he was being judged by God and his sentence was death, not acknowledging that death was his request. When the mariners asked, what should we do to stop this storm? Jonah suggested to toss him overboard to certain death. Be careful of using your mouth to make a request, because sometimes the Lord will call your bluff. The very thing that you're asking for in your time of distress, the Lord will put you in a situation to show you the danger of false words. Those words that you really didn't mean, but you said them anyways. Think about that, because that's what I'm believing is going on here. But yet Jonah wants to blame everybody else. The same man who couldn't do the action that he is suggesting is now blaming someone else for following through with his request. This time he's blaming God. Verse 4. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. Woo! I have been cast out of your sight. Pay attention to Jonah's words here. Only in the darkest of moments do we think we are capable of being outside of God's sight. When it's dark for us and it's hard for us to see, we assume that God can't see, as though he didn't call forth light. Think about that. When guilt is present, it has the capability to present your case in such a light that it seems all hope is lost. Another point in this text, when we go back and read, Jonah said, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. There is power in your yet. Jonah had just enough faith to counter the overwhelming feeling of guilt by declaring that he would look again toward God's holy temple. By doing so, he shows us that even when we feel like we are too far from the sight of God to reach us, as long as we still have a yet inside of us, God is faithful to pull us up again. We'll stop there for today. As you already can see, Jonah 2 is filled with action. The stage has been set. Jonah is now in the belly of the great fish, crying out to God as he petitions heaven for mercy. Jonah is as low as he can go in every sense. He had almost given up hope that God would rescue him, but he found a yet within that he took hold of. Tune in next time to see how God delivers him from his watery grave. Remember, God is merciful. Session 3, handouts. Discussion questions. What beliefs about prayer do you hold? How does what you know or believe about prayer impact the intensity or frequency at which you pray to God? Think about the last time you faced a situation that appeared hopeless. How was your communication with God during that time? What have you blamed God for? As you reconsider the events, where should the blame have been placed? Have you forgiven God? Have you forgiven yourself? What about the one involved? Till next time. Bye.